Hey guys, before we get started on today's video, I want to share a short message with you. This video has actually been on the Whitetail Master Academy for the past month or so. I just put it on my YouTube channel kind of to introduce everyone to the Whitetail Master Academy. If you go to that website, you're going to see a bunch of free videos, but you're also going to see some videos that are only available to subscribers. And I know there's other folks that are putting out, series of videos where you pay to watch those videos one time. This Whitetail Master Academy is one that you can refer back to from time to time. All the videos we put on there remain available for as long as you're a member. You can refer back to them, if you need tips on some habitat project or whatever. But after watching this video, I think you'll have a good idea of the quality of the videos that we put out. I think you'll find this, just a little bit more advanced than a lot of the land management design videos that you'll find on YouTube. But anyway, after watching it, I hope you'll go to Whitetail Master Academy and give that a look. Hey, welcome back to the Whitetail Master Academy in the property design section. Today we're going to take a look at a very unique 180 acre property, or approximately 180 acre property in Iowa. And what makes this property so unique is you're going to see it's actually divided into about 3 different sections. There's a road that comes through and divides the property, but then there's a third track that just corners up to one of the properties on one side of the road. So actually, when you look at it from an aerial, it's almost like there's 3 different tracks that make up this one property, which that alone makes it unique. But then another thing that I've never encountered before on any of my consulting visits is there's actually an airstrip on the neighboring property, and that airstrip actually comes onto this property, and the person that owns that airstrip has easement or access to the airstrip that's on this property that we're designing a plan for. So that's something we're going to have to work around as well. So a couple of very unique things that you just don't see very often on these consulting visits. Something else I want to do here on this video that I've never done before is every time that I go and consult on a property, I evaluate that property the way it sits that day, the day of my visit. And I evaluate it on 4 different criteria: on the food that's available on that property, the cover that's available on that property, the huntability of that property, which things like access comes into play there, wind directions and such, and then holdability of that property. How does that property have the ability to hold mature bucks, or just hold bucks to allow them to reach older age classes? And a lot of that comes into how that property ties in with the neighbor. So as I evaluate a property on those 4 criteria, I give them a ranking from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best. And that ranking is for that day when I'm doing that consulting visit. And then I list some things that we can do to bring each of those rankings up and make that property the very best that it can be for each of those criteria. And so on this property, I want to kind of start out by sharing with you how I rank this property in each of those 4 areas. So as far as food goes, I gave the property a 6. There was a little bit of food available when I did my consulting visit, but I seen the property as needing a lot more food. This property had the potential to actually be a 10 out of 10. And we weren't there yet, but if this plan is fully put in place, I think as far as food goes, we can get that up to a 10. We can give those deer year-round food without them ever running out. There's just enough plot space and such there to do this. The other thing is, the next criteria is cover. And I gave this property a 7 out of 10 for cover. There's some things we can do to make it a little bit better, but there was some really good cover on the property. There was some CRP tree plantings that provided some thick cover. There was some mature woods that was fairly thick as well. Some steep ravines and such that made for some rough terrain where mature bucks could get back and hide and not be disturbed. So as far as cover goes, I gave it a ranking of a 7. And in the plan that I put together, I noted that we could probably improve that just a little bit and probably get it up to about a 9 if this plan is followed. Huntability on this property, I gave it a 6. But I think the layout of that property is really going to keep it from being a whole lot better. We've got the road for access, and that's primarily where all the access is going to happen, is off of that road. And the road does cut through the property. We are going to be able to hunt various wind directions because of the way things lay out. But we can improve on that a little bit, but I don't see it ever being a 10, just based on the wind directions and the access that's going to be available on that property, things we can't do anything about. Holdability, the ability of that property to hold mature bucks, and again, this goes a lot towards how it lays out with the neighbors. And on this property, I gave it a 7 as far as holdability. I think we can improve that a little bit as we improve the cover and the food on the property. But again, I don't see it ever becoming a 10, but I think we could probably bump it up a little bit to an 8 or a 9. So with that said, let's get into the property itself, and we're going to take each of those 3 sections one at a time, and then we'll tie them all together at the very end. So as we look at the 3 different sections on this property, I'm going to start with the north section and work my way south. So that far north section is about 40 acres. The south border of that would be the road that cuts through that property. And we're just going to dig into that 40 acres, and then I'm going to lay out everything except the tree stand locations, and then we're going to move on to the middle section and then to the south section. So on this top 40 acre section, that road will make the south boundary. The thing that jumps out at me is there is just a fantastic stand location on this property. There's already a stand there, but I think it could be made way, way better than it is today. You're going to see, like in the northwest corner of the property, there's a CRP tree planting. And there's some areas in that planting that are really thick, but there's also some areas that are kind of open. And the trees just didn't survive well in those little pockets. And as you drive along the road, there's places where you can really see into that cover, especially in the wintertime or late fall, during hunting season. And we want to try to stop that, any road traffic from seeing into that cover, make the deer feel more secure so they will actually bed there more than they are today. So what I'm going to suggest is that we start by planting a row of either spruce trees or cedar trees along that road. We're going to wrap it around, and as you see here on the marked aerial, and kind of surround that CRP tree planting on 3 sides. The other thing you're going to notice is there's a food plot right in the corner where the deer are coming out of this CRP area and hitting that food plot. Well, I think that food plot could be expanded just a little bit to make it a little bit bigger. We want to provide as much food as we can right there. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to put another small food plot, I'm going to call it a green plot, right in front of a blind that's already on this property. And that blind is actually going to be called stand number 1. But that green plot is going to be like a kill plot, if you will. As the deer come out of that CRP tree planting, they will hit that green plot before going into that bigger food plot, which I'm going to suggest is planted in grains. Right in front of that blind, I'm going to suggest planting a handful of fruit trees. Maybe 2 or 3 pear trees and 3 or 4 apple trees. Just again, we want to, as those deer come out of that CRP tree planting towards the food, we want to get them to stage up, before they expose themselves in those open plots. These fruit trees will give them a chance to stage up where they'll feel a whole lot more comfortable in daylight hours, and yet they're still going to be in range of that blind, which we're going to call blind number 1. That's really probably the biggest opportunity on this 40 acres is right here. Now, there's a big part of this 40 is the home and the yard, barn, and pasture area. But on the east side of that pasture area, there's another area that we're going to designate it as sanctuary. It's pretty steep. It's already full of thick wooded cover. We're going to just stay out of that. We're going to call that sanctuary area as well. But then just to the south of that, we're going to create another big food plot. As you can see here on the aerial, it'll be really easy to hunt this plot, just slipping right out of the house and right across the yard and through a narrow band of trees. We can slip into a blind there. This plot is going to extend as far south as the road. We're going to use some miscanthus to screen it from the road, but it's going to be a plot that really adds to the food on this 40-acre part of the property. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to put a feeder on this plot, basically at the end where it meets the sanctuary. That feeder will be really easy to fill, coming right in from the barn using an ATV or UTV to bring that feed to fill this feeder. The deer are obviously using this area already today. I think we can enhance it with this food plot and this feeder. We'll have a blind there that's going to be really easy to access as well, so it's going to be easy to hunt. We're going to need an easterly wind, so it's not going to be one that can be hunted a lot, but it's definitely going to be good when you get those east winds. A couple things that I will add about this part of the property is right between the house and this food plot, there's a strip of trees that it's fairly open today. I mean, it's not real open, but it's open enough that I think a TSI cut in there to make it a little bit thicker would screen that plot from the house, make the deer feel a whole lot comfortable. And then yet we can create an access path right through that wooded cover to the blind that we're going to hunt with that east wind. And this wooded cover, it's not very wide at all, and it's going to serve more as screening than anything else. It's going to screen the hunter coming to and from that blind, but it's also going to screen the deer from the house and all the activity around that house. Before we move on to the next section on the property, one thing I want to throw out, we might as well just throw in the tree stands while we're talking about each section. And there's one other stand on this 40-acre north tract, and that would be by that big plot, the triangle-shaped plot there that we talked about earlier. It's one that's going to allow us to hunt with a northerly wind. We can come right through the pasture. It's going to put our scent basically back in the horse or cattle pasture there. But those deer are coming out of that corner of the plot right now and headed between the two sanctuaries that we have marked here. So that'll allow us to hunt with a northerly wind. It's going to be one that I would say is going to be a whole lot better during the rut, maybe the early season. I think late season that stand is going to be a lot harder to get into, and there's probably not going to be quite as much traffic. But when those bucks are cruising, this is going to be a good stand as those bucks cruise back and forth between those two bedding areas. So as we move on to this middle section, this is the section that has that airstrip that I talked about earlier in it. And it's just something that we're going to have to work around. It's not an airstrip that sees a lot of traffic, but nonetheless, it's one that the landowner is forced to keep open because the neighbor, when they sold the property, kept the rights to that airstrip, to use that airstrip. So we're just going to deal with that. What I really like about this middle section is the cover on it. There's several acres of CRP trees growing on this one too. Some really good thick cover, and as you can see that we're going to utilize all of that as sanctuary area, and it kind of ties into the sanctuary area on the other side of the road from the section we just talked about. The only thing is that we have the road kind of splitting through that sanctuary, but this is a road that doesn't see a lot of traffic. It actually dead ends at the next house. So basically the only traffic on this road is going to that house at the end of the road. So the traffic is very little, but this is where we're going to really, improve the holding power, if you will, because this is some bigger cover than what we had on the other side of the road. Some really good thick CRP tree plantings that are several years old. I am going to suggest that they go in and thin some of those trees. Those trees are starting to grow into each other and compete, shade the ground. So they need to go in there and probably cut about 2/3 of those trees and get some sunlight in there. Allow the trees that are left to really, fill in their canopy, grow a bigger canopy. But also that sunlight will come in there and hit the ground and improve the ground cover as well. So we're here in a CRP tree planting on this Iowa property, and I'm going to give just a quick lesson on how to do a timber stand improvement, which basically just means thinning this tree stand. So you come into an area like this and you can see these trees are planted close together. They're starting to grow into each other, and that's really going to affect the growth of the trees. But the other thing it's doing, as you can see behind me, where these trees have grown together, they've shaded the ground. There's very little ground vegetation compared to like where the sun is coming in. So what we want to do is come into a group of trees like this, and we want to pick out the best tree that we're going to leave. Say we're going to leave this tree. It's got one of the nicest, biggest trunks. We're going to leave this, and we're going to cut every tree around it. If the crowns of these other trees start growing in together, it's going to limit this tree from branching out and creating a nice big crown. So any tree that comes close to touching the branches of this tree, we want to cut it. There's another tree right out here. You can see this is a bur oak. Now, I like to focus on the trees that are going to have the most value for wildlife and for timber down the road. So, this white oak here, it's going to produce good acorns in years to come. It's also a tree that holds its leaves well into the winter, providing some cover in the winter. Where this bur oak, this bur oak will produce some acorns as well, but it won't produce near the cover. And as far as timber goes, this white oak is going to have much more valuable timber one day than this bur oak ever will. And the branches are just about to start to come together. So what we want to do is just cut this off. Just cut this bur oak off at the ground, let it fall. And where it falls, it's going to kind of grow up with grass and briars and other vegetation. And that tree laying there will kind of support that vegetation. It'll give the deer some structure to bed around. They'll put their back right to this fallen tree and bed around those. But as we walk through this tree planting, there's a lot of trees that need cut here. I'm going to guess that well over 50% of the trees in this planting need to be cut. And it may seem crazy to cut these trees we planted, but we're actually creating a whole lot better stand of timber in the future, and we're creating better bedding cover today. So a lot of times I mention a TSI project or a timber stand improvement. And today we're on a CRP tree planting project. It's several years old. These trees were probably planted, I'm going to guess 15 to 20 years ago. And they were planted way too heavy, which a lot of times that happens on these CRP projects because you never know what the survival rate's going to be. But here we had really good survival. And now these trees are just growing into each other. They're way too thick, and we need to come in here and do a TSI cut to thin them. And you can see here that about every 5-6 feet there's a tree. We literally need to come in here and probably cut at least 75% of these trees, at least 3 out of 4. Because as we go down this row and we pick out one of the nicer trees that we're going to leave and we want to clear out around it, we're not only clearing trees in this row that it's in, we're also going to clear trees on the rows next to it to give that tree space. So as we come through here and do a good TSI cut, you're looking at removing at least 75% of the trees. And what I recommend is just cutting that tree off at the ground, tipping it over on the ground. We're going to let sunlight come in. That sunlight is going to encourage the growth of grasses, forbs, briars, just all kinds of other vegetation. It's going to really thicken up that ground cover, make it better for deer bedding. But one of the primary things it's going to do is the tree that we leave, now it can fill out. Today these trees are fighting for sunlight, so they're putting growth on, top growth. They're shooting for the sky to get that sunlight. as we remove the trees around it, the canopy of those trees can just branch out. And the ones we leave will start producing acorns a whole lot quicker than if they're having to compete like they are today. So we're not only making better timber, we're making better bedding cover, we're making better food all at once with a TSI cut. You know, I've done this exact thing on my own farm. I had a TSI cut a couple years ago that I did on a CRP tree planting, and I just went in with a chainsaw, and I mean, it looked like a tornado come through when I was done. But all these trees that I cut, they're now laying on the ground. They're dead, so that sunlight shines right through those branches. And you know, a lot of woody vegetation can come up through those tree branches, those tree tops that are laying on the ground, and the deer will bed around those tree tops. They'll put their back right up to that tree top as protection, looking away. But it just creates a lot of ground cover that today is not really here. So we're gonna start with that, adding to the sanctuary there. We're gonna just jump right down and address that airstrip now. We're gonna screen that airstrip with miscanthus, and you can see here marked on the aerial how I've kind of outlined that airstrip, and I brought that miscanthus right past the end of that airstrip to form a point. And right at that point, we're gonna have a blind. We're going to hunt it with a westerly wind. It's going to blow our scent right back down that airstrip. And as you can see, we're going to have a big horseshoe-shaped food plot wrapping around that airstrip. And that blind is going to be, you know, right there in the middle of that horseshoe. So we're here at one of the bigger plots on the whole property, but I'd like to see it even bigger. I'd like to totally maximize this whole area for food. I don't know how many acres we got to work with here that's open. Some of it's already enrolled in CRP, so we might have to either wait for that CRP contract to expire, or
that's done.
It's done?
Yeah.
Then I would I'd put as much food right here as possible. We got just fantastic cover basically in both directions, and you need a lot of food. Here we are, you know, it's early January, and basically today there's no food on the property. I mean, they're scavenging. We've seen deer everywhere, so they're obviously eating something. There's some ag fields around the area that they're probably you know, out there picking around in. But we need a lot more food today than what we have today, and this is a perfect location for doing it. I don't believe this can be seen from any road.
No.
So the deer are going to be hid back here. They're going to be hid with good bedding cover on your property in two directions. Food. I don't know how many acres we can get in here, but I'm guessing
there's
probably
at least 15 more that way that you could.
I was going to say 10 at least, but
yeah.
So this is where we're going to feed those deer and keep them through the winter. And we're going to teach the deer in the neighborhood that this is the property to come to when they're hungry. Because here in Iowa, you know, you can start supplemental feeding, you know, once season's over. So you could come into this spot with 4 feeders, you know, and scatter 4 feeders around this 15 acres and really get those deer to focus on this spot as the place that there's always food. 365 days a year, there's food right here. Around the edges, you know, you could plant a single row of fruit trees all the way around the edges, like maybe 10 apple trees, and then 10 pear trees, and then 10 persimmon trees, and then 10 chestnut trees, and then back to 10 more apples. Just totally surround this with food sources they can't find anywhere else in the whole neighborhood. We're going to really set your property apart. We're going to make your square on the checkerboard different than every square around, and this is going to be the hub. This is going to be where those deer come, and it's a smorgasbord, things they can't find anywhere else, and it's never ending. It doesn't matter what time of the year it is, there's food right here. And that's really going to take your property to the next level. It's going to help bucks, you know, in the late season. They're going to, if things get tough, you know, they're going to recognize this is where I can go and always find food. And I think you're going to easily have over 100 deer here in this plot in the winter months anyway.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a lot of food to feed 100 deer, but the advantage you got is that you can put a feeder out. In Illinois, where I'm at, we can't do that. So we want to maximize what we can in the plots and with the fruit trees and all that, but we don't ever want them to run out of food right here in this location. We're going to really enhance it by planting fruit trees all the way around the edge of that horseshoe-shaped food plot. There's going to be several acres in this plot. I'm going to suggest that we divide that plot in two, and that division is going to take place right at the point where that blind is at. So as the hunter is sitting in that blind looking out at that food plot, to his right he's going to have either greens or grain, and to the left he's going to have just the opposite, and those will flop each year with crop rotation. But that break or that edge that's created with those two different types of plots coming together is really going to enhance deer traffic as the deer move back and forth from two different food sources, and that's going to take place right in front of that blind. Back at the other end of the plot, right close to the property line, we're going to have a couple of feeders. We're going to supplemental feed when legal outside of season there in Iowa. And this is going to be easy access locations for those feeders. We're not going to be going deep into the heart of the property to fill feeders, but yet they're still going to be in the feeding areas. One thing I like to do in states that allow supplemental feeding is have feeders, but I want those feeders right on the food plot or right on the edge of the food plot. I want those deer coming to the same location for their food. I don't want that food scattered. And right here we're having the supplemental feeders. We're having two different food plots, greens and grains, and then we're surrounding the whole thing with fruit trees. So this is just going to be a major hub to this whole property right here around this airstrip, where the deer are going to come from basically three different directions to feed. One thing I'll note about this middle section as well is that this blind we're putting up at the end of that airstrip where the food plot makes the horseshoe, that's the only stand location at this time that we're going to have on this middle section. This stand is going to be able to be hunted by putting absolutely zero pressure on this property. Access is going to be right down that airstrip with miscanthus on both sides. You're going to be able to get in and out of that blind without disturbing deer, even if they're feeding in the plot in front of you. So that's the only stand on this section. Although I did suggest to the client that I'm guessing when all is said and done, there's going to be a couple other stands reveal themselves as we change things. Today we don't have that major feeding hub that we're going to have. But once that's established, I believe there's going to be some other good stand locations reveal themselves. But this stand at the end of the airstrip is basically just a great starting point for this part of the property. So now let's move down to the bottom section of this property. And this third piece, if you will, it is the biggest piece of the three. It's about 71 acres, mostly wooded, but there is some great hunting opportunities here. So we're back on the back property line. A lot of hunting pressure on the other side. That landowner lets basically anybody hunt. It really affects this property to some degree. The good thing is there's a fence, which is a physical feature that separates the two properties. A mature buck can learn, that one side of the fence is safe, the other side is not. That doesn't mean a hot doe is not going to pull him over there, though. There's not a whole lot you can do. You've got a pretty good fence, which I like to see, but depending on how far you want to take it, you could put a new fence through here. They make a woven wire fence, woven wire just like this, that's actually a little over, I think it's 76 inches tall, which is, 6'4". So, it would be as tall as my head. If things got too bad across the line, you could always come through here and stretch some of that 6-foot woven wire and really shut down the deer traffic across there. But I think the fact that you got a pretty nice fence anyway, the fact that we're pulling all the deer that direction with the food, I don't expect this to be too big of an issue. You're just going to have to monitor it and then make your own decision on what you're going to do. I never ever push anyone to build a fence. That's a personal decision.
Yep.
I always encourage you to try to work with your neighbors if you possibly can, but there's situations, I've got one of my own where I had to build a fence on one side of my property, and I've never shied away from talking about it. It is what it is.
But I don't encourage, or I let everybody just make up their own mind what they want to do as far as that goes.
Yeah, because that used to be a great stand up there, but it's like I've completely abandoned that just to get away and leave it be.
Yep.
The first thing that I want to note is that basically, because of poor access, we're going to make all of this section, all the cover on this section anyway, part of the sanctuary again. It's just going to add to the holding power and allow us to get more bucks to older age classes. So with that said, there is some hunting opportunities. There's actually more hunting opportunities on this section than probably the other two combined, but those are all going to be pretty much on the edge. So let's start up in the northeast corner of this bottom section. And there's an area that you can see where if you look across the road into that ag field on the other side, you can see this grass waterway that goes out into that field. Well, that grass waterway is obviously the lower spot where the water runs out of that ag field on the other side of the road. And this is just a great spot where the deer are already crossing the road out of this wooded cover on the property we're consulting on to the neighbor's ag field. They're crossing right there at that low spot where that grass waterway is, and we want to take advantage of that.
So right here we got a situation where across the road there's some big ag fields where those deer are feeding, but we got a gate. And the legendary Roger Rothhard told me probably 40 years ago now that a big buck will walk 100 yards out of his way to go through an open gate instead of jumping the fence. And this is just a perfect situation to catch those deer as they're heading out here in the evenings to feed. And you can see behind here is just a little bit of an opening. And what I would do to enhance this even more is I'd take advantage of this opening with just a handful of fruit trees, maybe 5 or 6 pear or apple trees right here. Let's just give those deer another reason to use this gate. And I think we can set a blind right up here on this hillside, just right above this opening. And, you know, to the, what is that, the south, I think?
It'd be north.
Okay, I'm totally turned around. To the north here is that CRP tree planting, where it's going to be good bedding cover.
Yep.
There's the south-facing slope back there that you showed me. We get those deer bedded back there, and when they want to head towards this ag field, they're going to want to use this gate. Our fruit trees are going to give them another reason. Access is going to be absolutely killer because you're going to come right off of this road ditch, and we're only talking 10 yards off the road. It's just a gravel road. It doesn't see a lot of traffic, but I mean, this is absolutely zero human intrusion. Right now there's a lane that goes back to a couple little plot openings. I'd eliminate all that. And you're going to find out before the day's over. When I say zero human intrusion, I mean zero human intrusion. But we're going to get those deer bedded right here. You know, probably within about 100 yards, 150 yards from where we're standing at this crossing. And with the gate here and with those fruit trees we're going to plant, we're just going to encourage them all to cross the road right here. We're right by this blind.
And we're going to have a stand just off of the road where this crossing is taking place. But today there's a little bit of an opening there, and that opening is going to be a fantastic location for us to stick in some fruit trees. And you know, again, it's just a great way to get a mature buck on his feet without totally exposing himself as he would if he crossed the road out into that ag field to feed. He'd be totally exposed. But what he will do is he will stop there at that little opening before he crosses the road, where we're going to plant a handful of fruit trees. We're going to get in there as many as we can. I think there's only going to be room for about a half a dozen or so, but those half a dozen fruit trees at the spot where the deer already want to cross the road anyway, in a sanctuary where there's absolutely going to be no human intrusion or no human pressure, is going to make for just one fantastic stand location right there in the northeast corner of this section. And as we move on down the road along that east side of this section of the property, we come to an opening, and this is going to be a fantastic spot for a food plot. That food plot is actually, the road makes a 90-degree turn right there, and that food plot is going to wrap around that 90-degree turn there on the road. we're going to screen it with miscanthus. We're going to put a blind right there at the turn in the road, which will be really easy to access. The client can just come right down the road using a quiet cat bike or whatever, park it there at the edge of the road right under that blind. And we're going to do the same thing here that we did up at the middle section in that horseshoe food plot.
If you followed me at all, you know I'm a big fan of big food plots. The bigger the better. Fewer but bigger. We want to concentrate that deer movement. And on the far side of this property is where the hunting pressure's at. The negative factor, you know, that hunting pressure is pushing deer onto your property. So we want to pull them deer the same direction. The hunting pressure is pushing them this way. From the other side of the property, on this side, we want to pull them with food. And this big hayfield here would be a perfect place to do that. You know, I warned you that there's probably some things I'm going to throw out there that you're not going to be too crazy about doing. And this is probably one of them. We got the gravel road here behind us that I think needs screened with miscanthus.
Yep.
And but I would have this entire hayfield in food. I would try soybeans. The fact that there's giant soybean or giant ag field behind us may help grow soybeans here, but this is a chance to add a few acres of food and do it in the right location. It's opposite of that hunting pressure on the neighboring property. So we get deer to bed in the sanctuary. They're not going to want to go the other way because of that hunting pressure, but we're going to pull them this way with the food, which is the way they're going to want to go anyway. Just an ideal location. I think we can put some stands and blinds around the edge of this field, and probably at least 2, if not 3 different locations, and take advantage of that.
We're going to divide this plot into 2 different crops right here at this point where the road bends. So on one side will be greens, the other side will be grains. That transition from one to the other will happen right there at the corner, right in front of this blind. Absolutely foolproof access to get here. Just a fantastic opportunity to hunt what would it be, a southwest wind, a very common southwest wind. If we move back between this stand and the one we talked about previously, there's another location that I found that you can see on a topo, but an aerial's not going to show this very well, and to be honest, the topo just barely shows it. But there's a little ridge point where there was a lot of buck sign, and obviously there'd been a lot of deer bedded on that point, and the sign showed me that it was probably a buck bedding there, or multiple bucks have bedded there over the years. The access off of that road is so easy to that little ridge point or knob that we had to take advantage of it. So we're going to be able to pop right off of the road with a westerly wind. It can be straight west, northwest, southwest, but we're going to be able to do it with a westerly wind, and we're going to be able to cover that little knob where the deer like to bed.
Why this off, come in here with your mower and mow a trail that way, and then mow another one right through this way, and be able to shoot right up there at the intersection of the 2.
Right.
Easy in, easy out. Never disturbing a thing. This deer could be bedded in there 30 or 40 yards from this tree, and it's thick enough you should be able to slip in here without busting if there's any kind of breeze at all, especially early season when everything's green.
Would you put, like, if I did a ladder stand, would you have it ladder coming here?
That's exactly what.
Because I'm right-handed.
Yep.
And then obviously I can shoot.
Yep.
And I'd be able to see the field. Right?
Beautiful.
Crawl right up here.
Yeah, I'd make my trail for the deer though right over here a little bit.
Yep.
So they're not too close.
I'm gonna have to take out the pole, but I can get that shit right in here.
Probably use forks or a grapple bucket or something and throw some of that stuff to the side.
Right. That's easy. That's a good spot.
Beautiful setup.
And on this particular stand, it's going to be really good during the rut and on a morning hunt. We're not going to want to go in there in the afternoon when the deer's already bedded on this little knob. We want to get in there during the rut in the morning, well before daylight, and be waiting in our stand when either the bucks come into bed or they're cruising through as they're searching for does. But so that gives us already 3 stand locations on this track, and we haven't even gotten to the far south end yet. So as we come around the property line on the eastern side, it kind of makes an odd shape, but we're going to put an access lane around that, right on the property line, right around the edge of the property. And there's a couple of other opportunities in some openings for some fruit trees. I don't want to plant plots in here. I just think it's not a big enough spot, and the intrusion that we would cause bringing equipment in to take care of little plots is not worth it. I would much rather see these plots planted in fruit trees where once those trees are established, there's very little maintenance, and the maintenance that is there, is all going to take place outside of hunting season.
So along this edge, I've noticed you've got 2 or 3 stands, and you've got some small plots. What I'd like to see you do to really cut down on the human intrusion, because you got to go a ways back in through here to get to those plots. I think they're good spots. They give you hunting opportunities for other wind directions. But I'd like to see you come in and in front of each one of these stand locations plant a grove of fruit trees. So like this blind out here to our left, maybe here you plant, I don't know, there's probably room for 6 or 8 pear trees, and then we move to the next spot and you put 6 or 8 apple trees, and then you just stop coming back here. So we're giving a deer an extra reason to be coming by these stand locations. It's giving us other options for other winds, but we're cutting down the human intrusion. We're not having to come back here and work plots or anything, and once those fruit trees are established, basically we're done.
Makes sense.
I'm cutting down on your work a little bit. I'm making up for them hay fields I'm taking from you.
No, it makes sense.
Yep.
So you can see the first one will be hunted with, again, any westerly wind. This is a stand that you could hunt any time of the season. It's probably going to be good early. It could be good late. I'm going to guess early and during the rut is going to be really prime as when that fruit is ripe and the bucks are cruising. The way this sets up with the ag fields around it, it's going to be really easy or conducive for bucks to cruise that downwind edge of this cover. So as we move right around the property line and get on that southern edge, you can see the other opening where we're going to stick some fruit trees. We're going to have a stand there to allow us to hunt northerly winds.
Rope scrape.
Beautiful.
And then as we move right on down that edge, there's another spot where the deer traffic is kind of funneled up close to the wooded edge where it meets that field. That I think would be a good stand location as well. I'm going to say that these stand locations that are close to those fruit trees are probably going to be better in the evening, where we can get there while the deer are still back bedded in the sanctuary before they're headed that direction. Going to be a little more difficult in the morning. As we come in, there's a good chance we could bump deer off of those fruit trees and such and push them into the sanctuary. So, but the last stand is going to be more of a morning option. If we could circle around that ag field, staying well away from the edge, and come into that stand with the wind right in our face, that's going to be a fantastic spot to catch them bucks as they're cruising during the rut and the morning hunt. So as we wrap things up here on this property, the thing that really jumps out at me is the opportunity to provide a lot more food, and to really the need to cut down on that human intrusion within the cover. It was just obvious that when I was there that there was way more human intrusion throughout the property than I like, and not near as much food as I like. And if we just do those two things, we're going to make things a whole lot better than they are today. But if we take those two things to the absolute limit, the maximum that we can, I think this property has the ability to produce giant bucks on a consistent basis, maybe even every year. It's in a super good area in Iowa that produces good bucks on a regular basis. It lays out fairly well. You got the big ag fields that are around it on a lot of the sides. You do have some wooded cover that touches it as well, but if we can honor that sanctuary and allow the hunters on those other properties to, put pressure on their woods and push the deer and get them bedded on this property, and then the food is laid out in such a way that we're pulling those deer away in a totally opposite direction of the neighbor's wooded cover. We're pulling them out where it's very likely that they're going to hit our plots before dark, and then after dark they will head on out to the bigger ag fields that surround this property. So there's some really good things going on with this property. The fact that it's divided into 3 different sections doesn't sound that appealing at first, but once you have a look and you've got a plan, it's really not that bad at all. And I'm really excited to hear what this client kills in the future, because I think I think the opportunity is here to make this property into something really special.